Loud and Quiet presents Midnight Chats.
Welcome to episode 10 of Midnight Chats. If you've not joined us before, this is our interview podcast series, and the vibe is very much that of a late night conversation. And if you have listened before, you'll notice that the podcast sounds a little bit different. We've given it a bit of an update and a bit of a sound makeover. So we hope you like the new kind of feel of Midnight Chats. We took a little break over the summer. It's been a little while since the last episode, which was episode 9, where our guest was Natasha Khan from Bat for Lashes. If you want to go back and listen to that one, it's still available on iTunes and Acast and SoundCloud and the usual places. It was a really good one. I really enjoyed that. But now we are back, and we're going to be putting out a new episode of the podcast every fortnight on a Thursday night at midnight. So you can expect loads of great guests over the next kind of months. But on to this episode, and for episode 10, my guest was Jon Hopkins, and he came into the office here in East London a couple of days ago. It had been a baking hot day, and he just got back from the States where he'd been playing at Bon Iver's festival and also did an amazing sounding road trip. I guess Jon Hopkins, if you're not that familiar, is probably best known for his album Immunity that came out a couple of years ago and was nominated for the Mercury Prize. Absolutely phenomenal record. Definitely one of my favourites of that year. And he's also produced across his career for artists like Coldplay. He's been a frequent collaborator with Brian Eno's, and he's scored lots of films. He's just been involved with just loads of absolutely brilliant projects. His career started out, he was the keyboard player for in Imogen Heap's band, but this is kind of almost 20 years ago now. So yeah, he came into the office, we had a great conversation. We talked about transcendental meditation, which is something that Jon practices, which sounds pretty fascinating. The re-release of his debut album Opalescent on vinyl, which is coming out at the end of this month, August. And also we talked about the sort of current health of London's nighttime scene, because it's been a tricky period of, well, I suppose a few months, few years, for the kind of London's nightlife scene, which Jon's obviously part of, and that was really interesting to hear his thoughts on that as well. So yeah, I will shut up now and let you listen to our conversation that we had with Jon Hopkins. This is episode 10 of Midnight Chats, and I hope you enjoy. Jon Hopkins, welcome to Midnight Chats. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
We've somehow conspired to record this on what's been one of the hottest days of the year.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it.
Yeah, and it's kind of the setting. We're in Loud and Quiet's, we're in our office here. And if you hear any kind of background noise, it's because we've got the window open, because it is absolutely sweltering, but we kind of wouldn't have it any other way.
It's all right up here. It doesn't feel like my house at home is sort of a bit microwavey at the moment.
Right.
But this feels pretty airy and deceptively cool.
And what's your studio like on a day like this?
Studio's over in Tower Hamlets. It's kind of a ground floor, very shaded, dark, slightly grim, but kind of cool. It's been a studio for like 35 years.
Okay.
So there's just a lot of cracks in the wall, so I think the air gets in.
Yeah.
I don't know if it gets out again, but
not by conventional means.
Not by conventional means. There was a fan, but I think it like runs on diesel, just chugging away in the corner, and you can't really record anything because everything's really loud.
You might be inadvertently kind of poisoning yourself by putting it on.
Definitely a highly toxic place to make music, but it's cool.
So you're looking really well. You've literally just come back from America. It sounds like you had an amazing time. Did a bit of a road trip. How was that experience?
Yeah, it was amazing. So I spent a few months in LA, sort of brainstorming ideas for the album I'm going to record, and then I had this festival booked called Eau Claire, which is curated by Bon Iver's Justin Vernon. Mm-hmm. So I thought, me and my friend thought we would drive there.
Okay.
And we did quite a circuitous route via, I think about 8 different states and like 3,000 miles. A lot of national parks, a lot of stopping for a night in incredible places, and it was really genuinely mind-expanding until you get to Kansas, and then it's just like flat. Literally nothing changes the whole state. But even that, you sort of load up with great music and podcasts, and just it's something is so alien to English people, just complete flatness and for thousands of miles. It's incredible. But yeah, some of the more epic landscapes like southern Utah and Colorado, I've never seen such rock structures. And it's like Grand Canyon, but it just kind of goes on forever.
Yeah.
And you're like right at the bottom of it and driving through it, and it's not even... It just gives you a great perspective on how small you are, and it's very healthy, I think.
I had some family that lived in Kansas for a while. And I remember them...
No offence to them.
No, I mean, actually, they didn't actually last that long. They actually kind of moved back to the UK. Because I think it is, certainly in terms of the state, you have to go a long way to find anything else that's outside of that, basically.
Yeah.
And I think they found that quite hard. But I remember them sending an image of their sat-nav in their car once, and it said something like, turn left in 1,200 miles.
Yeah, we had a lot of those kind of directions. But we had to stay a night in Kansas in a little town called Burlington, which was literally just Burger King, Arby's, Quality Inn, McDonald's, maybe 3 or 4 other equivalent things, and that's it. And then if you work there or live there, you have to work in one of those places. All the land is controlled by mass agriculture, monoculture, and so there's no wildlife. Everything stinks of cow pat.
Yeah.
And I don't know why, actually. I didn't see any cows, but anyway. It must be
It's just coming
on
from
the
the
wind.
earth.
Yeah. And like there were signs up in the motels saying it's not recommended that you drink the tap water here if you want to get pregnant or you are a child because of high levels of nitrates. So it doesn't feel like public health is number one priority. It's it's very much big companies just using the land and getting everything out of it, and then local people just have to work in the chains, and that's it, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, you just kind of get back in the car, keep going. But we ended up in Lawrence, Kansas, which is an oasis of liberal awesomeness. There's a college there, and one of my best friends back in LA is her family's from there, and there's a great music venue called Liberty Hall, and there's lots of like fun hippies around, and so that's amazing. That really stands out as the place to visit in Kansas.
I think the States are, from my limited amount of travel around the States, but with the different places I've been, there always does seem to be that one town that just seems sort of not in step with the rest of its state. I think Austin's a little bit like that when you go to Texas.
Yes, yeah, these little oases of liberal thought in otherwise quite culturally difficult, shall we say, places to be. But it's a fascinating country, and really for me it's not about so much experiencing culture as it is experiencing these landscapes.
Yeah.
We were up in this little minuscule town called Marble in Colorado, and just rented a house for a couple of days, and it was like a rocking chair. I'm just looking out over this vast scape of mountains, and I've never known such silence. I've never seen the Milky Way so clearly, really, and I don't know, it was just sort of quite enlightening, really, just to forget the minutiae of the stuff that you think about day to day, just to get out here and see the vastness of the land, There was something really, really like amazing about the silence of this place as well. I mean, normally I like having music on a lot and even just quietly, but it was just turned it off and just had bird song and nothing, and like the sound of the wind through the leaves and stuff. It's pretty amazing.
I know that like as part of your work before, you've been like as part of the creative process, you've used like field recordings and kind of involved those in your kind of output. Did you find yourself doing any of that stuff whilst you were there?
I never do that when I'm just on holiday. I do that, I mean, with Diamond Mine and Immunity, there's quite a lot of that stuff, and it tended to be the places around where I was recording. So for Diamond Mine, it was when King Creosote is from Fife, and we did a lot of recordings around there so that you could feel the origins of the music. And Immunity is more urban, obviously, so you can hear around the studio. The idea of putting a recording of some birdsong from Colorado on an album that I'm doing in London just doesn't feel right, and I like to forget about it all as well. I need a lot of time away from music in order to be able to keep making it and performing it, because it takes it out of me. I put kind of a lot into it, and so this trip was, whilst we listened to a lot of new stuff, I was trying to stop thinking, draw a line, stop thinking about what I'm going to do next, really.
So I want to talk about Opalescent, because your debut album is getting released on vinyl for the first time at the end of August, which is exciting. Presumably, it must be a kind of interesting experience to you, because the record was written in 1999. So, like, first off, kind of take us back to 1999 and kind of talk a bit about the circumstance that you were in, the kind of your surroundings, where you were living, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so it was just after my 20th birthday, I think, which is August 99. I already had some demos, and the demos that had got me the opportunity to release the album with Just Music I'd written had started to turn into tracks from the album. But I only had an Amiga 500, so I needed something which could at least get up to 16-bit. And so the record company helped me out with some equipment, and I just had this tiny setup in the bedroom. And I was earning money at the time from playing keyboards as a sort of session keyboard player. I had been working for Imogen Heap's band, but that didn't. That only lasted a year because the sort of label budget for bands ran out. So I was kind of... I felt like it was all right to not know what I was doing because I was only 20, but I just started writing really without any expectation of anything happening. It was great that it was going to get a release and that would be official, but just the idea that it would be listened to, I wasn't even thinking about it. And this meant that the process was very free of pressure and very innocent. And it sounds like a record with very little ego to it when I listen to it now. And I try and avoid too much of that in what I'm doing these days, but it's just harder when more people are listening for it to be as pure as that. So it's got this naive quality, which I think is what makes it worth, at least, I think it's a good intro to what I've gone on to do, I think.
How do you feel kind of looking back on that period? It was like, is 1999 does that bring back kind of like nostalgic feelings? Because when I think of, I was looking up earlier, like the kind of what the sort of music landscape of 1999 looked like, and it was like Eminem and Limp Bizkit and Bewitched and like those sort of things that were in the charts.
Yeah, those were of course the chief inspirations. I
can hear a lot of Bewitched in
Kaniki.
Yeah.
And Shed 7. I like talking about all those bands. I didn't really listen to any of that stuff, as it might not surprise you to hear, but it was I don't remember what I was listening to. I think because I was working as a pop session player, I think I was really quite inspired, whether I wanted to be or not, by the tracks I was working on. So the songs on Opalescent are structured almost like songs and like actual vocal songs, just without vocals, with kind of instrumental parts instead. And I mean that's one of the things that makes it a strange record that doesn't really sit with what else I've done.
And it was like a different world of creating music at that point, because I don't think even MySpace had like a mainstream moment at that point, and it was like people were getting so worked up about like the Millennium Bug, and it was
that was funny.
It was, wasn't it?
Yeah. I wonder what happened to all that, like all those tins of food that people bought. It's like holed up in a shed. And then literally nothing happened. Literally nothing happened.
Just like a cash register in like Asda in Newport failed once.
Some spam went off. On the stroke of midnight.
I know. What kind of feelings do you get when you listen back to that record now then? Because presumably as part of this process you've revisited it and kind of listened to it again, and do you feel kind of full of pride of like the fact that it was kind of your debut record, and you kind of, that's a kind of big moment for any artist making music. What's the sort of mixture of feelings listening back to it now? Well,
it was really satisfying actually going into electric mastering, which is where Guy Davey works, who masters all my records, and he didn't master this originally. It was done with a guy called Simon Hayworth, who did my first two. I started working with Guy in 2006 or 7, I think, and so we took the masters and just, we didn't really change the sound very much, just did it for vinyl, maximised it for vinyl. We haven't gone super loud or anything, just trying to keep the real purity of the sound. And it was really nice to hear it on his system. He's got these sort of 6-foot mastering speakers in the studio, and it sounded alright,
For like, it stands up.
It was that is the album in which I learned what EQ even was, and what I was learning about the basics of mixing and all these things for the first time. And just going on ear, and even though I'm sure it's all technically all over the place, it seems to sound rounded and warm, and Yeah, I mean, you know, it was all 16-bit, and like there's technically some hum behind all of it, but you can't really hear any of that. So it was it was a proud moment, and there are songs on there that I think I'm always going to be really have a connection to, like Cold Out There, this sort of track we led with when we were reissuing. It's got signs of the things I've got obsessed with doing over the years, like a kind of a hypnotic element that builds gradually over time. And there are other ones. I mean, the things that date music tend to be beats more than anything else. So there are some beats on there that I cringe at, but they're not, you know, it's not really about that. These are more, this is very much a melodic album. So the drums are just kind of like almost like the structure on which the melodies are painted, if you will. I don't know. It's it's something I think to be reasonably happy with.
Yeah.
At this state.
And now, I mean, obviously these, like, kind of 15 years since its release, Ivor Novello Awards and Mercury nominations and things like that, do you still remember the feeling of what it was like the day after that first album came out, and like kind of holding the first copy of that album? And is that a feeling that comes back?
That was, I don't remember holding the first copy, but I do remember like when we were in the art studio doing the sleeve and stuff. That was amazing. That's when it started feeling really real. And there was a long gap between mastering and release for some reason. I can't remember why, but I think it came out in July of that year, 2001, actually. So it was amazing just to be able to say my album, and because I never thought that was a thing. You could just be someone who couldn't sing, or, you know, I wasn't familiar with the Warp catalogue back then or anything really. It seemed amazing that someone like me could just make that in their bedroom, and then it would be pressed and released like that. And then he even got some reviews as well, which is amazing. And they weren't all, you know, there was one.
Can you remember what people said about it?
I remember one magazine calling it oral wallpaper, which has stayed with me. quite an amusing way of describing it. Generally, they were nice, though. It's funny how your brain will latch on to the less positive reviews. Like, you can go through. These days you can go through like 200 comments that are good, and you're like, yeah, whatever. And then there's a bad one like, I'm gonna. It's amazing how our brains.
I'm gonna
like
get
to operate that
Simon01 on YouTube.
Exactly, yeah. So I don't look at things like that anymore. But no, it was well received, and my manager managed to get some tracks used in some TV shows, and that was really exciting hearing it on TV. TV was a big thing in those days.
Yeah, I mean, it went on to be used. Music was used on Sex and the City. Yeah, and so. What was the experience of hearing? I mean, obviously, the way that music's synced now is like a huge kind of, to my mind at least, has kind of become a much bigger thing these days in soundtracking everything online and films and TV series and everything. But what was it like hearing your music that you created in your bedroom used on like mainstream TV on a really massive, popular American TV show?
Yeah, it was great. But I think the first time I heard it was on the end of like. Some gentle gardening programme, and that was such a big moment because it was BBC Two and it was a beautiful scene. I can't remember what it was, some sort of harbour
was it like
shot.
Monty Don's gardening or something?
It was something along those lines, yeah, but it just had some really good photography in it, and they used the end of this track, Lost in Thought, and I think just a friend phoned me up. This was before I had a mobile. I just phoned my landline and said, turn on BBC Two right now. And I did, and it was playing, and that was like a real moment, just because I'd never heard my music with images before, I'd never seen, you know, and it was a beautiful scene. That I remember more. I mean, the Sex and the City thing was amazing. That was a few years later, I think. I mean, the record was out 2001, and I think that happened 2003 or 4, and it happened a few times, like 6 different tracks, I think.
Okay.
And that was different because it had actual money behind it, which meant I could stop worrying so much about how I was going to be able to afford to do the next album. And, you know, Just Music, the label, was sort of ahead of their time in pushing syncs, getting in there with the music supervisors early. You know, obviously it's a sort of scrum these days. It's just everyone's trying to get that because that's how you can still make money from music. But I would feel like I was very lucky with that label to get in that world early and to sort of gradually start to make a name for my stuff as something that goes, you know, hopefully well with film and imagery.
once Opalescent was out there, what kind of doors, looking back on it now, did it open up for you in terms of the opportunities that came in the next few years?
That's a harder one to answer. I don't think it did bring in other work particularly. If it did, I'm not remembering it correctly. But second album, I mean, I worked on my second album quite soon after that, and you know, this was a kind of period where not that much happened. I was learning stuff, and the second album didn't get any attention, so I had to start learning production. I had to build a kind of new network really by actually going out and meeting musicians, and I'd kind of done everything without doing that so far. And it got me to a point, but I realised I was going to have to move away from that point and you know, almost start again, because jobs didn't just appear from this really. But that's very healthy, you know, and I was still only 24, 25, and started going to gigs and meeting singers that I liked and trying to get vocals off them and just try and make some headway into the indie music label world, really. Yeah.
So obviously, you know, when we look back over the last couple of years with the success of Immunity, and like before that, like you mentioned there, you went off and you collaborated with a lot of different artists, and people know the work that you did with Coldplay, and you've also done some work with Brian Eno and fantastic names like that. So how did going from releasing your debut album to doing that production work, did that create a balance that you're quite happy with, and you sort of see something that you want to continue with, always having collaborative projects working in line with the music that you create at the same time?
No, I mean, those were all incredible experiences, and obviously meeting Brian was a life-changing thing, and I met him when I was 23 actually, and the year before my second album came out, and meeting him led to a lot of other things and a lot of amazing projects and a lot of things that gave me a lot of security, you know, in being able to keep doing music and not have to worry so much about money. And but I think I was forced into that a little bit by this second album not really doing anything in its own right, but obviously it ended up being a blessing because, you know, all these collaborations ended up being very life-changing. But I always had this intention to, when it was possible, to focus primarily on solo music. And when Insides came out, it was, I think, 2008, the end of 2008, 2009. That album was written so much alongside so many other projects, and it was very, very difficult to really focus on it. And I'm proud of that record in the same way I am of Opalescent, but you can hear a number of years of different styles within it.
Right.
It's like it's got different tempos all over the place, which I think makes it varied. But why I found Immunity to be a more satisfying record was because it was focused on a bit more closely. I was only doing that, really. I did a film score around the beginning of it and another one around the end, but there was a big chunk in the middle where I was genuinely just exploring my sound and working out what I was going to do with this record, and that was very... so it's a kind of great luxury, really, to be able to just get on with that and not feel too pressured. And there wasn't a huge expectation on it because Insides was, you know, it did all right, but it was quite an underground thing still. So when Immunity came out, it was new to most people, and I hadn't felt rushed, I hadn't felt pressured, and it was again quite a pure experience. And the one I'm making now, I've very much tried to do no other jobs at all. So I've been really lucky to have some amazing approaches, particularly for remixes from artists I would have jumped at working with, but I've had to be strong because I want everything to go into this one. You know, it's important to me that it's the best thing I can do. So
it's kind of no distractions.
Yeah.
Did you put like almost physical barriers around that in the sense that you set aside a 9 till 5 to go?
I put like police tape around the street. No, I tend to. I have a really great manager, and she very diplomatically declines everything. And then I have to do quite bizarre work. I find it so overstimulating writing what I'm writing at the moment because it to me sounds very different from what I've done before, and I'm just excited by the possibilities. Sonically, but if I do more than a certain amount of hours in a day on it, then I won't be able to sleep that night because my brain will just keep going. And however much exercise or meditation or booze. Actually, booze beyond the point does work.
Right, okay.
You can't really get into habits of needing that.
No.
So
As he says as he looks at the bottle of whiskey.
I did notice that bottle of whiskey.
It's actually
looks
not
pretty
bad. I mean, it doesn't look a great colour, but we had some the other day and it's quite good.
It looks. Why does it say 808 on it?
It was released by like a DJ.
I was going to say,
And,
part of me was hoping that it wasn't because it was
looks
music
like-
related, but it is music related.
Yeah, it looks
808.
like the kind of whiskey that you'd get served in an ice bucket at 4 a.m. in Las Vegas, doesn't it?
It does, yes. And that word blended is never so very disconcertingly vague.
No.
Chill filtered for purity.
Yeah, it's been there a while. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got a few bottles of stuff that's like when you get given something. I've got this sort of dandelion vodka or something
Ooh.
that I think is sort of brown, and when you come home and think, I really want some of that. Yeah, delicious.
I'm not sure I'd ever think, I fancy some dandelion vodka.
Infused with something unpleasant.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
But no, so yeah, it's very hard when you're really in the thick of it to switch it off. So I sometimes will do every other day. Sometimes I'll do 4 hours and then do something completely different in the afternoon. So this is the reason why it's not getting done as quickly as I'd like. As I'm getting older, my brain when it's working as well as it ever has or better, but it doesn't switch mode easily. It doesn't switch into peaceful resting mode, and if you don't sleep, the next day is fucked. You can't really do anything useful. So I'm still sort of working that out, and it's the reason why things are taking longer. But the good news about that is that it means what's getting done is definitely exciting, at least to me. It's a big step forward, I hope, sonically. So,
Where does your meditation kind of fit into that? How does that help you with the creative process and separation from it, I suppose?
yeah, it's kind of life-saving, really, because you do it when you get up, and you do it again sort of after getting home from the studio. And the idea is that it refreshes you and divides the day, from work and not work. But like, such is the level of stimulation they get from writing music, it's not enough on its own. But you can tell it's doing a lot. And like, if you're wide awake at 5 a.m, you can do an extra one, and it will, just the way thoughts go round and round at that time when you're not rested properly it's not fun. And you get a lot of kind of negative thoughts about the chances of finishing a record on time, all this kind of thing, and then you can just sit there and meditate, and it cuts through all that bullshit, and you go back to sleep. In theory, so it's kind of there's a practical way in which it provides rest for the brain, which means you are able to get on with work. But I've also noticed since I started doing particularly transcendental meditation, which I've been doing for a couple of years now, or 2.5 years, that there's an ease with which ideas come. It's like it's easier to think along more exciting pathways when I'm working on a sound, or how a sound can change into another sound, which is one of the things I've always done in music, things morphing and things coming out of the background and changing into other things. I noticed a very, very specific new depth to that since I started meditating in this way, and
So it brings new dimensions to what you're creating.
yeah. And when I first learned, I noticed that after a meditation, if you listen to a piece of music, you can almost feel a new layer of depth to it, like a new space that was behind the space where you thought it existed, and it's deeper, and it's like a field of sort of infinity beyond it. And on headphones particularly, I could hear the tails of reverbs from one sound or another sound that I'd never noticed before, and they would be miles away to the east or something, and become part of the landscape, really. And at the same time, it enhances your perception of colours. So, and it's fun. You get used to all that stuff after you've been doing it for a while, but some days you realise, wow, this red thing is really red.
Yeah.
And it is slightly more profound than I made it sound. But there's definitely some sort of growth of consciousness that occurs when you do it regularly. So,
do those kind of like visions always appear in the same form? So with the music you're creating right now, if, like you say, it brings out extra dimensions and extra depth. When you listen back to a track, do you always kind of envision the same things, or does something different come out each time?
No, things are amazingly different on each listen. For me, that's often been the case with other people's music. My stuff tends to, I know so intricately what's going on in tracks. I don't hear new things each time. But I was listening to this that Todd Terje track, "Snooze for Love," which has been one of my favourite sort of Scandinavian techno things for years. And it's on first listen, it's like, okay, this is it's a pretty melody. There's no kind of, it's not particularly dirty. There's no real edge. It's very straight in timing, very kind of Nordic, and which is very satisfying to listen to. But I wouldn't have guessed that I would still be listening to that and thinking, well, I'd never noticed that little thing there, or the way that thing comes in, or the way that melody line always sounds so effortless, and yet it's changing all the way through. And I mean, there are not many tracks that do that to me, but that's definitely one of them, and very well known one as well, for good reason.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier I mentioned Brian Eno, and then you mentioned Brian Eno, but now that you're kind of like 15 years on from the release of that debut album, have you found through your collaborations, have you built up any kind of, do you have people that you see as like mentors in the kind of music space, and do you have people that are kind of mentees? Do you like try and pass on knowledge to people you work with in the studio when you meet like a young producer or somebody you can tell's hungry? Yeah,
that's interesting. I don't tend to encounter many young producers. My studio is quite bands come through there quite a lot, and to the studio downstairs, but no one really comes into my room unless they're invited. No, there don't seem to be many. I don't come across many young electronic producers. I mean, in the online world I get messages and stuff, but I just kind of stopped looking at too much technology because I find it sucks life out of things somewhat. But yes, I mean, there are very key figures that were mentors for me, not through the experience of meeting them or knowing them, but just through their music. Like, I mean, Fortet's a very obvious one. And what I learned from him was to move away from, and in fact, Brian Eno, to some extent, the same thing, moving away from precision in programming. And I had this very mathematical way of working when I did my second album, particularly Contact Notes, very quantized and accurate and gridded and not very performed sounding. And when I heard Rounds by Fortet, like every other young producer at that time, I was sort of blown away by how free, and he's sampling from amazing records, but that no one's, not many people know, and then using the feel of that to guide the track. And first time I heard it, I was like, wow, that snare's early, that's weird, why didn't he put it in time? because that is not, my skills certainly then were more in the melodic and atmospheric and arrangement type sphere, and rhythm was something I've had to learn how to do, and it's not come as easy. I put in so much work into making drum programming sound real and natural, and now I can do it without effort so much. But like, it was artists like him, and I mean, Brian is very much not into perfecting things, so he'll just put something down and leave it. And I didn't think that way. It's like, wow, you've got to get everything perfect, but you don't. You can leave things. And so I went the other way in the end. There's noise and out of timeness all over my more recent records, and the more of that is in there, the better, I think. And that's kind of life and spirit, and But I've tried to keep the sensibility for melody at the same time, and that's kind of the area in which I'm working now, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting because Immunity was the first time a lot of people discovered your music, because it was fair to say your kind of biggest success so far in terms of the solo work you put out, and it kind of culminated with you played a show at Brixton, didn't you?
Brixton Academy. Yeah, that was a kind of lifelong dream, because the first rave I ever went to was there in 1995. I think Chemical Brothers there.
Amazing. What do you remember from that show?
That was brilliant. I was having an amazing time. It was just very, very exciting for a young lad.
Yeah, I think people always remember the first all-night rave that they kind of got away with. I mean, I remember the excuses. I hope my parents aren't listening to this, but like the excuses you give when you go to your first kind of Brixton Academy raves. They used to put on, particularly with sort of more live bands like Chemical Brothers, they would put on like a normal show, and then like the night after they would do like the Saturday night right through the night show. That was always the one that was a lot more like exciting, wasn't it?
I don't remember how I got to go to those. But I definitely was there.
Yeah. definitely.
I don't remember
physically there.
Yeah, maybe I was more like 16 or 17. Maybe it was all right to be out all night, and
Yeah.
I don't remember. But I was very stoned in those days, so
Yeah.
my memory is patchy. But great days.
Yeah.
That gig was amazing, and so to play at Brixton was very like, and I was so glad that show of all of them went really well, because a couple of the other bigger ones, when you do a bigger show, you kind of ramp everything up. I did a show at the Forum, which was my biggest show. I think 2,500 people I'd ever done. So much pressure on it, and we'd commissioned all these new visuals and had these new videos made, and the fucking cable from the projector just broke just before the show, and I had to keep everyone waiting for 45 minutes, and I couldn't. There was no one to explain to people what was going on, so they thought I don't know what people thought was going on, but it was a sort of a nightmare.
Pulling like an Axl Rose.
Yeah, and I was actually at the side of the stage just like shouting at a cable. my VJ Dan Toombs, who also does Gold Panda and various other people, actually managed to save the day by some bizarre.
Did somebody run to like PC World? Or
I think Dan managed to manually hook up some cable across, and then we used the monitors and the walkie-talkie to like time things, and he saved the day. And but some people had to leave early because to get the last tubes, and this was very painful. So it was it was amazing to be able to do Royal Festival Hall and Brixton Academy and get those ones right. And I've always just it's painful when you put so much into something and people think that you've just like couldn't be bothered to go on time. But unfortunately I don't have quite the stage confidence to actually get a mic up and say, look, this is what's happening, because I've never done any public speaking, so that wasn't going to be the first time I did it. But hopefully the people that did manage to stay to the end liked it, and we can all move on.
If you kind of like, speaking of those early gigs at Brixton and like fond memories of kind of early raves and things like that, do you follow like the kind of ups and downs of like London's night scene? Because obviously recently there's been, I've read lots of pieces, it feels like, certainly about the closure of like the clubs of London, like the night kind of scene of London in particular seems almost unrecognisable from 15 years ago, really.
Yeah, it seems to be really sad. I mean, I can't claim to be particularly well versed in that world. I was never really a big clubber. I got familiar with clubs through playing at them in my late 20s when I started touring insides. But I'm very aware of the cultural necessity of having a decent nightlife in a city, and I hope London isn't going the way of Sydney. Sydney's become nearly impossible, like this beautiful place, but you basically can't stay out after a certain time anymore, and it just sucks the life out of places and makes them into these sort of barren playgrounds for billionaires. It all looks great, but where's the excitement here? And I've not been in London much the last year or two, but I can just sort of I can feel those losses without being someone that actually goes clubbing that much. I'm just aware that it's also a very important outlet for the music that I make and that my friends make. So
I wonder how the Night Tube the Night Tube started now, isn't it? Like, whether that will impact on it and whether that will either open or close doors. I'm not necessarily sure how that will impact.
I have no idea. I think the biggest problem is just going to be the buying up of properties to making them into sort of an infinite amount of fancy apartments, so that it seems to me like every factory in the world will one day just be an apartment where actual things are happening anymore, but it doesn't seem to be here. It's definitely a tragedy. But what I think will happen is, I don't think you can suppress that spirit. You can get it out of the major cities, but it will pop up in the areas where, like, a lot of my friends are moving to places like Margate and Hastings and further out east, and these places will resurface somewhere where people want them. It's sad for London. People growing up in London are going to be deprived of what was exciting about it when I was a kid. Looking
back at kind of your career since the release of Opalescent, you've done some like amazingly kind of varied projects. Like a couple of years ago you worked on the score for the Barbican's production of Hamlet.
Oh yeah.
That
was last year, I think.
Oh, was it last year?
Yeah,
with Benedict Cumberbatch?
Yes, last summer, yeah.
What I'm interested to know.
I forgot about that.
Did you forget about that? What was that experience like?
I thought about that since last July. It was really difficult, actually. Not because of the people or the play. The play is great. I don't know. Hamlet. It's really good.
It's a classic.
I think it's going to do really well. Everyone was so cool. Like, Lindsay Turner, the director, was kind of a hero of mine, actually, and Benedict Cumberbatch was just so cool, so nice, and seeing these amazing actors rehearsing right in front of me while I was writing stuff was just incredible.
Is that how it works then?
That's how it was working. I mean, I had some ideas, I'd sketched some ideas, and then me and Christopher Schutt, who's this incredible sound designer that Lindsay always works with, and he did Warhorse and all various other great theatrical productions. So I would just supply him with sounds, melodies, ideas, and he would combine them himself, and work directly with Lindsay on bringing them into the play. The reason why it's difficult was because I'm used to writing, when I do film scores, which is the closest thing to that, you've got the thing on screen, you can just improvise directly at the piano whilst watching, the actual scene that you're working to. But it's not really possible in a room with headphones on. You can have a keyboard maybe, but it doesn't. You can't stop and start them.
Can't say,
so
Benedict, hold on, mate. Can you just do that passage again?
Yeah, say that line 15. Can you say that line slower for a bit? It doesn't really. It was just difficult in that way, and I think without Chris, this sound designer, doing what he did, I think it would have been impossible for me to do it. But he was so good, and Lindsay was such a genius that he actually turned out really well. And when I went to see it, I think in September or October last year, I was blown away. I mean, it was an incredible production, like absolutely extraordinary, and I loved the way they'd used my stuff.
Was that simultaneously one of the hardest and most rewarding things you've done?
It was more on the hard. I mean, it was so rewarding seeing it because, I think I was also going through a period of intense difficulty sleeping again because there was just this bulk of work, and I think I got into a routine of just not being able to shut down. So my memories of the Hamlet experience were mostly thinking, wow, I should be enjoying this so much because these people are amazing, but the experience of actually sitting there trying to make stuff happen when your brain is zombified was very difficult. So yes, it was incredibly rewarding to come back having forgotten about all that mild trauma and actually just see it.
When a new project comes along, what kind of boxes as such does it have to tick for you to be kind of to pique your interest?
Well, that one was, I was already trying to get into the mode of not doing anything at all. Not doing anything, as in retiring. No, not doing anything apart from starting this new album, and I had some ideas down. But it was just too special, and I loved Benedict Cumberbatch stuff, and I met with Lindsay Turner, and all her references for how she wanted it to be were just my favourite things. She's talking about Mulholland Drive, and she's talking about Twin Peaks, and she's talking about Breaking Bad and things that I was just in love with, and it all seemed very modern and exciting, which is exactly how it turned out. So I did say no to it at one point, and she was brilliantly persuasive, and I'm really glad I did it in the end. Everything else, I just got to a point. I've had great fortune in who I've met and who I've worked with, where I kind of now, if I want to do a remix, it's more for selfish reasons because I'm in love with the song, or I want to. I need a change from the intensity of writing my own stuff. I did this Disclosure remix last year, and it's a completely different musical world for me, and I was struggling with getting the immense pressure I was putting on myself of starting this big new album, and I did that, and it really got me moving. Just took that remix job because I kind of wanted to avoid writing, and it just got everything moving, and the remix turned out really well. I took it because I just loved the beat. I thought the rhythm was really good, so I just worked around that and didn't use huge amounts of the original song, but it was all inspired by what they'd done, and so sometimes taking on a job can be to remove some kind of blockage from what I'm supposed to be doing.
Finally, how is are you pleased with the progress that you're making on the new music? And it's going to be exciting. The follow-up to, like I said, Immunity was such a fantastic record.
Yeah, I'm in a state of perpetual either excitement or exhaustion. I mind a bit. I just had this road trip was really relaxing, and so it was a very different experience for the brain for a bit. But I just listened back to a few things yesterday, and it's there's definitely the best things I've written on there. Yeah, it's going to be. I don't know how long it's going to take. Yeah, but I kind of think that I've never once rushed one before, so now would be the worst time to do that, really. When for the first time there's a sort of weight of expectation on it, which doesn't help. But it is amazing as well, because it means that I'll be able to go straight in and do the shows I want straight away, rather than have to work up to them over 15 years.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, Jon, thanks for coming on to Midnight Chats, and we should probably go and get an ice cream or something.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Cool. Or some glass of 808.
Yeah.
Midnight Chats is a Loud and Quiet podcast. Production by Emma Snook. Music courtesy of Gold Panda. Search Midnight Chats on iTunes for more episodes and to subscribe. For more information, visit loudandquiet.com.